indeed. Now, listening to this is Paul Britton, the criminal defence lawyer. Paul, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I mean, the judge's sentencing elicited a cheer in and around the courtroom. There was a very muted but similar cheer in our office outside as well. Nobody thinks that anything's going to bring Olivia back. Of course not. But this is the kind of sentencing that feels appropriate in these appalling circumstances.
Well, it does, Vanessa. It's another tragic case in the news headlines. The circumstances was one drug dealer chasing another drug dealer through someone's home, and a child gets shot in the chest. Yeah. As your reporter there rightly pointed out, Cashman has been sentenced to a life imprisonment, and in this country, life is life. But what they also do is put in a date where they can apply for parole, in this case 42 years. There are a number of other offences that he's been found guilty of, 18 years for firearms and another number of other things. They don't get added up, so it doesn't get put onto the top. They will get served concurrently, but it is, as your reporter rightly said, going to be decades before he can even apply to get out on parole. And back into the public domain, which is the right decision, really. And
I'll just run past you the front page of The Sun today, which says, drug gang's bounty, £250,000 hit on Olivia killer, bid to silence gunman in jail. In short, it says that, you know, he will know, quite literally, it seems, where the bodies are buried. He'll know all kinds of information about all kinds of nefarious crimes, and his associates won't want him to blab in prison. And he might well want to exchange information for kind of better prison conditions, and they won't want him to, and so they're going to try and get him bumped off inside. Does that sound like, A, a likely plan, and B, something they'd be able to bring about if they did want to do that?
Oh, Vanessa, anything can happen. You can't really buy better prison conditions by exchanging information. He's not going to get out any earlier by giving up information. It's unlikely it will benefit him. What happens in prison is anyone's guess. British prisons, it's not like the States. They are very, very safe, and someone like Cashman will be kept separate in a high security, at-risk area. I find it very unlikely that any harm will come to him while he's serving his sentence.
OK. It's been suggested also that the police are going to try and, as they put it in the papers, get the drug money back. Does that sound to you like the sort of thing that actually does happen, or does that money mysteriously disappear and is spirited away into thin air and none of the ill-gotten gains are ever really recovered?
Well, quite often, the proceeds of crime are often recovered. But the authorities tend to be the ones that are able to recover it. Is the suggestion that the drug gang is going to recover the money?
I think this is the police again to try to find the source of Cashman's incredibly lavish lifestyle. He lived in a great big house and he drove big cars. The girlfriend was dressed to the teeth, God knows what. And I think the idea is that they're not going to just let the family live off the proceeds forever. That's the idea.
That is a serious part of investigations that will stem on from this. If he has been living a lifestyle beyond his means, the police will be looking carefully at that. Everything will now be up for grabs to be seized, from the house to the cars to bank accounts. I wouldn't be surprised if bank accounts were already frozen. So now it will just be the police going through certain processes to prove that those items, those assets, those chattels are actually the proceeds of crime. And it doesn't matter if you stole £1 and from £1 you made millions. It's the full £1 million. It's the full estate that's now likely to be seized by the police.
All right, now we want to move on to a completely different story, Paul, and this is the story of Timothy Schofield, who has been found guilty. You might want to take us through that, because we've been so focused on the Olivia Pratt-Korbel case. We haven't even mentioned it so far on this programme, so this is our first covering of this case at all. So you might want to tell us, first of all, what he was accused of having done, and then what the verdict is.
A number of sexual offences against children, spanning from watching pornography with a minor, performing sexual acts in the presence of a minor, and actually making that contact and performing sexual acts on minors.
When you say minors, is this children plural, or is this one young boy.
I think it's plural. It's not a case that that I'm dealing with or following that closely. I'll have to check that.
Three different cases apparently.
But
yeah.
so three separate minors. And when we say minors, we're talking about children under the age of 16.
Yes.
In his pleadings, he was not guilty. He said he was not guilty right through to the end. The jurors have found him guilty 10-2. They took just over 5 hours in deliberation before coming up with those verdicts. Sentencing will be later. I mean, as you know, we now televise sentencing. We don't televise the whole of proceedings in criminal matters currently, and that's particularly to protect witnesses. But we do televise the sentencing. So this will now be listed in the court for a sentencing at a later date.
OK, I mean, I've got a statement here from his brother, Philip Schofield. I'll just read it out, and maybe I'll take your view on this statement about the conviction of Timothy Schofield. Philip Schofield, his brother, says, "My overwhelming concern is and has always been for the well-being of the victim and his family. I hope that their privacy will now be respected. If any crime had ever been confessed to me by my sibling, I would have acted immediately to protect the victim and their family. These are despicable crimes, and I welcome the guilty verdicts. As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a brother." And Philip Schofield went to the police, I think 2 weeks after his brother told him about this, and did, shop his own brother to the police, which is something that, you can't help but commend him for, and something that many people don't find it in their hearts to do, isn't it? So that was an honourable thing to do. What sorts of sentencing do people who've been found guilty of this sort of sexual activity with a minor generally get?
Well, the sentencing guidelines for these sort of offences are quite broad, and I don't know enough about the case and the particulars. There's going to be all sorts of mitigating factors that may be caught in. One of the big things is that there was no guilty plea. It was not guilty right to the end, so there'll be no credit. If you plead guilty very early on, you sometimes get some credit towards these things. I know that Philip distanced himself from his brother very shortly after. I think in 2 weeks is a reasonable enough time for someone to assimilate what you've been told and decide appropriate course of action. And Philip did do the right thing in going to the police.
Yes. And I wonder whether you are surprised, or whether you're just inured to somebody saying, I no longer have a brother. I wonder whether that's the usual thing, or whether people in general find mitigation for their siblings and for their children and for their spouses and for their parents, and continue to somehow or other find some type of way to love them unconditionally, or to think that they were framed, or to think it was an aberration, but not to absolutely disown their relatives, or whether this is the right and proper thing to do, and the way that people normally respond. I mean, you're a criminal defence lawyer. You will have seen all sorts of behaviour over many, many years. I wonder how often you hear that. That's not my brother. That's not my father anymore. I no longer have a son. Do you hear that much?
On the scale, Vanessa, it's some people will, mothers and fathers will say, well, look, it's my son, it's my daughter. I will defend them and I'll be by their side. And yes, they've done wrong, but, they need my support. And others will just do what Philip's done and totally wash their hands with the relative. Everybody reacts differently. There's no hard and fast rule. There's no right and wrong to it. We all grow up in different situations and circumstances, and we react differently. So I can't criticise him for him. In de facto, he does still have a brother. But if he wants to say that he no longer has a brother, then I think that just represents how horrified and offended he is by what his brother has been found guilty of doing.
Right, can I just ask you something that has arisen on this programme already today? And this was, we spoke to a KC about Thomas Cashman and the Olivia Pratt-Korbel killing. And he said, I didn't ask him, but he said there's no way that any of this is ever going to stop until the supply of drugs in this country is legalised. And I wasn't as surprised as I might have been, because I've interviewed in the past couple of years numerous police officers, very senior police officers, who've said exactly the same thing. So I just thought, as a defence lawyer, criminal defence lawyer of so many years standing, Paul, I would ask you whether you agree with that, or whether you think they're mistaken.
Well, Vanessa, I wasn't going to go there because it kind of broadens the scope like it does on all of these topics.
Yes.
But yes, it does highlight that this country is slipping into a pit, much like the States, where drugs are coming into this country and criminals are capitalizing on that. And if we don't do something about it soon, we are going to see more and more and more of this type of crime. Victims. I mean, Olivia, for example, I mean, it's just unthinkable that a drug dealer would be chasing another drug dealer through your house, and someone in your family gets shot in. It's just, when are we going to actually take this seriously? And I think that is the salient point. Drugs, for a multitude of reasons, are wrong. They cause a number of problems, and in this case, a very innocent life has been taken because of it. So I think they're absolutely right in addressing that.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on the programme. That's Paul Britton there, the criminal defence lawyer, and we will be straight back with you after this.